Thanks everyone for joining us. We'll be talking about identity, inclusion, and the importance of building inclusive products. I'm Eliza. I'm a senior product manager at AWS, joined here by Sarah.
Hey everyone, I'm Sarah Handler. I'm a product manager at Netflix.
So we'll be talking about why it's important to have inclusivity in building identity products, because often those individuals that are building identity products are not often representing the entire consumers or individuals behind for all use cases. So it's super critical for us to think about the different personas, abilities of different individuals that may be interacting with our services products when we build them in the digital space.
Alrighty, so we're going to talk through a number of different things today. I do, at the outset, want to point out that this is a talk about inclusion. And to note explicitly that Elise and I are both white women, which has come with our own set of challenges, but also a tremendous amount of privilege in this space. So we are not experts on inclusion. We are not experts even necessarily on identity. This is based on our own lived experience and the research that we've done. So I just want to note that at the outset. So today we're going to do a brief overview and level setting on what we mean when we say identity. We're going to talk about the both overlap and divergence between our human identities and our digital identities and how that plays into how we build inclusive products. We'll talk about the value of mentorship and what we need to do next to take action. All right, so I always think it's great to make sure we have the same definitions. We pulled this definition from the ID Pro Book of Knowledge, which is a fantastic resource if you've not already availed yourself of it. And I'm going to read this because I think it's that important. Identity in our industry is shorthand for digital identity. It is often a representation of a real, natural person or something that acts like a person. So we're not going to talk today about app identities. We're going to be focusing on the digital representation of these real people. All right, so we think about digital characteristics that we are all familiar with in our identity systems. These should all be pretty recognizable to you, right? So if you take me, my employer is Netflix, I'm in the security engineering organization, my title is product manager, that's also my profession. They may have my university info or some other information about my digital identity that is needed for me to do my job. But I'm also a human, right? There's all these other characteristics about my lived identity that inform how I show up in the space where I'm using that digital identity. So I'm a woman, a white woman, a nice little millennial, lives in Seattle, born in the US, all these other human characteristics, and many unnamed, that form my human identity. For many people, these are entirely separate, right? We have our digital characteristics, and many people intentionally will keep some of their human characteristics outside of the workplace. But why this matters is because we are all humans building identity systems. So our human characteristics are going to inform how we think about the digital representations, not just of us, but of all of our users. And where this becomes challenging is when these are in conflict. It's also important to note that sometimes digital characteristics can be inferred from or human characteristics can be inferred from our digital characteristics. If, for example, I was on some sort of app that was tied to a particular religion, even though in that app it may nowhere say explicitly what my religion is, you could infer it because I have an identity in that app. And you can imagine with different types of services how that may become problematic when this data gets shared.
Yeah, so also thinking more about what's under the surface, right? So Sarah points out, the human identity and the digital identity. There's a lot more that isn't on display. Being a first-generation college student, being somebody who's neurodivergent, somebody who has a temporary disability, somebody who has a disability that's not visual to you. These types of characteristics underneath the surface that may not be tied to your object ID or profile ID or @.edu email are important in the way that we shape identity and in the way that we shape identity products. For example, if you have a temporary disability, like I hurt my thumb and inputting an MFA code may take extra time. I may want to choose a different factor, right? There are different types of opportunities, and when you're thinking about designing, to include use cases where it may not be obviously visible to you based on somebody's human identity and understanding what may be under the surface. There are also reasons why you might want to hide things beneath the surface. For example, if you come from a non-traditional family background and you live in an area where it may not be recognized, may be one reason. Another thing may be if you are a first-generation college student and your family's never been to college and you're at the college for the first time, you want to be treated like everybody else. Maybe that's not something you want to highlight and be doubted. There's kinds of aspects to think about when you are shaping your identity and why that matters in the digital realm.
Definitely. All right, so let's think about the overlaps here, right? Because all of us, I'm assuming, how many of you only has a single identity in any service?
Or account, Facebook, Twitter.
I know this is not going to be true because all of us at least has our Identiverse identity, and presumably the email that identity got sent to, right? We have a tremendous proliferation of identities across the internet, and I can at least just speak for myself, I do not want all of them to converge, right? We'd have different identities for different facets of us as a human across the internet. And this happens to all of us, to be very clear. Every single one of us is going to have multiple identities across the internet. But the implications of being tracked are going to be different based upon our lived identities, right? For the average, cis het white male, what is the implication if your identity from one app to another is tracked? Maybe not a lot, but if you're someone who has a more protected identity or is of the global minority, having those be able to be aggregated across all these different services can be incredibly problematic. Elisa has a fun example, not quite as bad, but an interesting recent one.
So there's a recent example. Eric Lewis, he's from the NBA, an NBA referee, had an account that was discovered. The National Basketball Association has referees that are meant to be neutral when they are refereeing games. And so fans found an anonymous account that was replying to a lot of comments about a referee and defending themselves, which is perfectly fine. You should be able to have the ability to defend yourself online, and it was anonymous, an anonymous account. But there's also this professional identity. When this person is representing the National Basketball Association, they're representing a non-biased opinion or view when refereeing games in basketball games like the NBA Finals, which are critical and super important to all fans. And so this becomes this type of dilution where you have a professional identity, right, and you also are tied to this human identity. You are as an individual and want to protect yourself maybe from comments online or the way that you're thinking about something, and not necessarily tie it to that professional identity, whether it's on Twitter or Facebook or another form of social media. So for now, Eric is not going to be refereeing the NBA Finals. This is, just an example of where the person does have the right to defend themselves or express themselves online, but can become convoluted in this sort of space of digital identity because you can't necessarily hide or protect all of your information online.
Definitely. And while rooting for a particular sports team is not typically what I'm thinking about when we talk about inclusion, it is a good example of why it's important to be able to have these things be separated. The other reason this is important is as we are building these systems, if we are not thinking about the unequal impact that this could have if our systems interact with others, we're going to build products that can't protect against that. So this is also why it's important to have people who would be impacted in the room when we're making these product choices. And these are just some examples, right? So on the left, we have this tweet from Helen where she was interacting with some service, having to create a security question. To be clear, the question of security questions we will put in another session. We're not talking about why they're problematic here, but she needed to choose her mother's maiden name. Now, what do you notice about her answer? It only has 2 characters. Who presumably was involved in making the requirement that it has to be at least 3 characters? People whose surnames are more than 3 characters. This is going to impact quite literally billions of people, right? But they were most likely not in the room when this decision was made. This was not an inclusive process in making this. So this form is by definition not inclusive of her. She'll have to lie, which I would argue is the right security guidance. But this is emblematic of a problem when we don't have the right people in the room making product decisions. The second area where this shows up when we think about how our identities can converge is the issue of data brokers. So data brokers are able to get information from many applications that probably a lot of us use every day, where people don't know that their information is being collected. This is particularly problematic when it's collecting location data. And once you have enough location data, it actually becomes really easy to identify a specific person because we are actually special little snowflakes who have our own unique patterns of going to particular places. And what we're already seeing is that law enforcement agencies are able to buy this data and then use it to arrest people or question people or put them in harm's way. So when we don't think about the implications of collecting this data or who we're selling it to, it's going to create problems for people. And we know that the people who are going to be most harmed are the ones that are already facing the greatest burden. So this kind of builds the question, or brings the question of, for whom are we building identity products, right? On the last screen, for whom was this being built? It was built for someone whose surname was more than 3 characters. And this is so pernicious, right? You even ask Google, what does a diverse group of people look like? Is that actually a diverse group of people, right? This is Google's idea of it. And I think there's a moral reason why we need to do this, right? Like, I think it's the morally right thing that we need to be including everyone when we're building products. But it also impacts all of our bottom lines. Any of you who were here last year at Identiverse, the last day of Identiverse, the Dobbs decision came down. And anyone who was on Twitter that overturned Roe versus Wade probably saw all these people telling women to get off the fertility tracking apps. Stop using them. They're collecting your data. It's going to be used for bad things. That probably could have been avoided if they had people in the first place who had built in protections so that it never would have ever been an issue, right? And so that hurt them. Lots of people left them. The Notes app probably had an all-time high of usage. And it's going to impact all of us eventually. So that's just one example of why we need to be thinking about everyone when we're building identity products, and getting people in the room is just the first step.
Thanks, Sarah. So continuing on that, retaining talent to build inclusive products is more important than ever. If you want to build continuously usable products, you also need to think about retaining the talent, retaining individuals who can speak on the use cases, but also providing inclusion for individuals to succeed within the identity and security space. We'll just walk through a couple of metrics because it's fun too, and it also really shows the disparity that still exists today. So, research shows that in order to apply for a job, women feel that they need to meet 100% of the criteria when men usually only apply meeting 60%. I had a friend applying for a job and I sent them something and they said, I'm not qualified. She was qualified because she ended up getting an interview request, but she didn't have 100% of the things on there. Right, so these things are not uncommon from what I've experienced and seen, and there's also research behind it. There's also more research around the fact that 38% of women who majored in computer science are working in the field versus 53% of men. There's also more that shows that there's a leaky pipeline where women are leaving the workforce after they've graduated with a STEM degree. There's a lot more important work that we can do once we get women into STEM roles to keep them there. That retention of talent is super critical if we want to continue to build products that are usable for all people and all individuals. If you only have a majority in the room building products, it's not going to be representative necessarily of all different use cases.
And all these examples are specific to women.
Yes.
The pattern is the same, right? We see the same patterns based on race and disability status and other protected statuses of people, right? So this is a particularly pernicious issue.
Cool. So I wanted to talk a little bit about a quick story that I had around expanding the talent pipeline. So in 2020 during COVID, I saw college students that had internship offers turned down, and I wanted to see if I could help. So back at Microsoft, I started the Shadowship program, which helps individuals from underrepresented groups and minorities. Specifically, I was focusing on women identifying colleges and HBCUs. So I did a lot of groundwork in recruiting folks at my old company to sign up to mentor these individuals. So in the first cohort, we had around 25 individuals that we mentored one-on-one and told them what product management is. So often being in STEM classes is not representative of what working in identity and security is, right? So we would talk about, this is how you set up an application. This is what Azure looks like. This is what the cloud is. Talking about these kinds of concepts got them really excited. These students now actually knew the applicability of what product management is and what it entails being a data scientist or a software engineer. So through these types of one-on-one mentorship, it was about a month and a half that we had for the first cohort. 90% of them said that they felt like they learned something new and were excited because they actually got an opportunity to talk to an actual employee that listened to them and told them, hey, you can do this. Continue to be in STEM. Yes, you're from underrepresented group, but we're here to help you, and we want to try to encourage you to stay in this field.
I also participated in that shadowship program that Elisa started, and it was incredibly powerful to see people who did not seem super excited or did not think it was for them actually change. And we know that with data that mentoring works. Mentoring is not going to fix our inclusion or diversity issue, but it is a powerful tool that we have, and the data backs this up. A 2019 study from Randstad showed that mentored employees were 49% less likely to leave. 49%. That is a tremendous intervention just with mentoring. So we know this is a powerful way, both from our personal stories and the data shows, that just by mentoring, we can keep people in our industry. But why should we care, right? Why should we care so much about mentorship in the identity industry? Well, we should care, A, because we have a huge shortage of talent, right? I think all of us have felt that. The crunch to find people that have the identity chops is really, really hard. So why would we build a system that has people dropping out of it? We need to get people to stay once they're here. Not just building the pipeline, but keeping them once they're in the room. We also know that having formal mentorship programs can make it a more equitable opportunity. People who mentor informally tend to mentor people like themselves, right? I've even been guilty of this. I'll see, a young new woman in the identity industry and think, oh, she's like me, I'll help her, I remember what that's like. But what that means is if we already have a bunch of men, or we already have a bunch of people of various identities, we're going to end up with the same people because that's who they're going to choose to mentor. So having formal mentorship programs can ensure and put more intentionality around making sure there's equitable opportunities across these different identities. I'll share a quick example of kind of what mentorship has meant to me. I've been lucky to have a number of mentors throughout my career so far. But I'm going to go back to me being a relatively new college grad, 23 years old, working on an identity product and being asked to go to a customer meeting in Atlanta, which I was a little nervous of. It was my first meeting to go to see a customer. I walk into the room, it's a big boardroom, a big table with all these chairs and chairs along the wall. And I am not only the only woman, I am also probably half the age of everyone else in that room. And I immediately felt, holy heck, I do not think I'm supposed to be here. There's been a grave mistake. I should not be here. So I go, I try to make myself as small as possible, and I sit along the wall. And a few minutes later, my coworker comes in, and he goes, Sarah, hallway. I think, oh no, this isn't good. And he comes up to me and goes, I did not bring you here to be a wallflower. You need to go into that room and participate. That's why you're here. And he reiterated to me, like, you're here because you're the one that knows what's going on. You're here because these people at the table do not have the knowledge that you have, right? And part of that knowledge I gained thanks to his help. But that was a really powerful moment for me, right? And I was able to keep in touch with him, and he provided additional mentorship over the years. Even small moments of mentorship to let people feel that they are needed and they should be in those spaces can be incredibly powerful.
Yes, so don't let it get too scary, right? We talk about a lot of the disparity and challenges, but truly the smallest effort, myself as well, having somebody include me and say, you deserve a seat at the table. Please, Eliza, come sit at the front. Pull out a chair for you. Just the smallest thing. It goes very deep, right? There's a lot of things that we can continue to solve for, but in Sarah's example, in my example, continuing to do even the smallest thing, don't be overwhelmed that you can't help. You can help.
Definitely. So we're going to have a little activity, but first, Elisa's going to talk about actions you can take as a leader.
Yes. So the key piece is take an action as a leader. Whether your organization, has goals and values around diversity and inclusion, you can set the tone. If it's important to you, your direct, employees or within your organization, you can set the tone that this is important in building inclusive and diverse products. Some companies tie it to compensation, right? If you're doing a D&I initiative, maybe you get more rewards. Not all companies need to do that, right? There's things that you can continue to do informally that can set the bar to build more inclusive and usable products. When you think about the use cases we talked about, right? We're just scratching the surface of some of the disparities that, people have and why they drop off in products and don't use some of our features and functionalities. Think about that in setting the tone for your, business, service, organization, or within your life.
Definitely. All right. How many of you have ever been a mentor before? How many of you have mentored, or how many of you have been mentored? Fantastic. You're cut out for this activity. I need everyone to pull out their phone, go to your notes app of choice. I'll wait. Or a piece of paper if you prefer doing this the old-fashioned way. I want you to write down, who are you currently being mentored by? I say, who's mentored you, say, in the last year? We know mentoring relationships don't always have to be super frequent. Who are you currently being mentored by? And then once you've done that, you can go down another line. Who are you currently mentoring? Once you have that list, I want you to look at that list and see whether the people you're mentoring look like you, right? I see a shaking head, no, that's exciting. Anyone else? No? Yes, some they do, right? I think this is a really important exercise to do relatively frequently, right? And I think it's okay to have people that look like you, especially if it's, we share an identity that may be more marginalized in our community. That can be a really, really powerful thing to have a mentor who is like you. But if you're someone who looks like the majority in our industry, if that's also what everyone who you mentor or is mentored by looks like, maybe there's opportunities for you to mentor some folks who could really use your expertise. So I hope that's helpful, and I hope you can go back after the conference and look at that little note and think, I think I'm missing a perspective here, right? Either from who you're being mentored by or who you choose to mentor. Being a mentee or finding someone to mentor you can be hard. If you feel like you do not have a mentor and you want one, speak up. I know this can be challenging, especially if your organization doesn't have a formal mentorship program. There's people in the community. You can reach out to me or Lisa. We'll try to connect you with folks. But don't wait for someone to offer you mentorship, right? Because we also know the people who are most offered mentorship are generally the ones who do not need it, right? So please speak up if you don't feel like you're being mentored. And leaders in the room, it is incumbent upon all of you to make sure that folks feel like they can be mentored.
Here's resources where you can learn more. There's a lot with women in identity. There's folks from Women in Identity here, Women in Cybersecurity, Dev Color. So there's formal resources, right? But and probably within your own organizations as well, like employee resource groups. There's also, this informal mentorship and ability to look for within, your teams, how you can help individuals, maybe that are not necessarily young college students, but maybe new to your team. Taking a look at how you can, maybe be a mentor to someone else that you haven't thought about mentoring is also an opportunity.
Definitely. This was quick hits on identity inclusion and the importance of mentorship. We could have spent all day chatting about that, but we really appreciate everyone taking the 25 minutes out of their Thursday. And with that, I think we have a few minutes for questions. Any questions from folks? Yeah. It's all you. There is, I'll repeat the question.
Okay, well, it's actually not a question, but just a comment about one of the studies that you talked about, right, about why women lead STEM. And there's another study that I would encourage you to read, and I'm happy to get you the site later. It was done by Harvard. And Harvard looked at why were there women graduates from the STEM program leaving STEM jobs. And in the study, they admit that they stereotypically believed the women left to have families. And in fact, what they found, they did not leave the workforce. They went to other jobs and other industries because they could make more money. They had opportunities for promotion. They were validated, welcomed, accepted, appreciated in other positions. They didn't find that STEM. And I think Harvard was almost embarrassed at their own, I don't think they realized they were being stereotypical until they went to look and were like, I don't know, how many hundreds of STEM graduates, one woman left to have a family. One. It wasn't even 1%. So I just want to make sure, I don't know if you realize that you made the comment about left the workforce. Probably not. They probably did leave the workforce. But they had to go find opportunities. And if it's not going to be in our field, shame on us.
Yeah.
Because that's a bleed of talent that we can't afford.
Yeah.
So
No, that's a good clarification. I think I did read of them finding feeling more hospitable in marketing and healthcare was one of them, but I think that's a good call out. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, we don't want people to leave the industry. Definitely. Oh, see, two hands. Let's all the way in the back first.
Yeah, so I love the presentation. Have you come across the term champion?
Yes.
I did some analysis for American Baker probably about 5 years ago. It never actually got published. They killed it.
Oh.
But what they found was one of the reasons why it was basically looking at the women at the top not being able to break the glass ceiling into the C-suite. And mentoring is really great up to a certain point, but actually have to show P&L expertise. And so in businesses, women don't actually get the opportunity to run P&L that much.
Yeah.
And the reason, one of the ways you can get these fun projects to get recognition is you have a champion. Champion's a little bit different. Actually, on the session after you're going to talk about it. But
Nice.
champion's a little bit different. They have a little bit more skin in the game. So I would just encourage you to kind of add that into what you've got, because it takes it to the next level to women who are like at higher levels. Part of my problem is like, you're not going to have women in the C-suite and women on boards if you don't have them all the way. And a lot of them do leave right before they hit the glass ceiling.
Definitely. Yeah, there's a difference between mentorship and sponsorship or championship. And it is, at a certain level, women are actually over-mentored and under-sponsored. I think that's all the time we have today. We'd love to chat if folks have more questions afterwards. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks.